Boy, does this bring back some memories. Hello guys, I'm Rakamdar. Welcome to my channel. Today I'm going to be showcasing a deck profile for Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel. Honestly, this is something I did quite a lot when I played Duel Links, and it's kind of nice to, do another deck profile. It's been a while since I've done something like this, but I'm still recovering from the flu. I've kind of been dealing with this for the past week or so, and the game of choice, because it's easy to play and not very intensive, was Yu-Gi-Oh! So I just played a bunch of Yu-Gi-Oh! Got real addicted to it, and now I want to make a little bit of content for it again. So today I wanted to showcase one of my favorite decks that I built, and that is Salamangreat, as you can tell by the title of the video. So let's go ahead and jump right into this. So Salamangreats are a fire cyber archetype. We have a lot of these kind of animal-like creatures that are fire-based attributes, and the goal is to use their amazing resource game to kind of grind out our opponents. A lot of these cards have graveyard effects that can constantly recycle themselves and gain a lot more advantage, and so this is going to be a little bit more focused around a grindier game and trying to just make sure that we constantly have more advantage than our opponent. The main combo and pieces that the deck aims to use is going to be revolving around the trap cards and our link monsters. As being, Cybers was from the Vrains series, and so of course we have links as our primary form of extra deck monsters. Now the Salamangreats actually have a fairly unique kind of mechanic to them compared to some of the other link monsters, in that basically if they are summoned using themselves as material, they can actually gain additional effects. So what does that mean? For example, Sunlight Wolf, if this card is summoned using another Sunlight Wolf, so there's two ways to do that. Basically, we could either use the field spell, which allows us to use a single card to get out the Sunlight Wolf. So basically, we'll have Sunlight Wolf on the field. Using the effect of the field spell, we can use that single Sunlight Wolf to summon a second copy of Sunlight Wolf. Now, another way to do this, which I actually just recently found out, I'm still kind of new to the deck, so I'm still learning things as I go along. But essentially another way you can do it is if you have Sunlight Wolf on the field and one other fire card, you can summon another Sunlight Wolf using the same, two fire effect monsters. And that will actually activate their effect. So yeah, I actually didn't know that, and I'm really happy that I discovered that. I was watching Pack, he was running some Sunlight Wolf, or he was running some Salamangreats recently, and I watched his video on it, and I discovered that part of it, which is really nice because it allows us to do some of the things that we otherwise couldn't do without the field spell. I kind of figured the field spell was like a super like important card. I mean, it's a really important card, don't get me wrong, but knowing that we can actually do some of these plays without the field spell is really useful information. It allows us to continue setting up a board even if we don't have the field spell to rely on. So yeah, basically that's kind of the gimmick of the deck, is we want to summon a Sunlight Wolf or another Salamangreat monster using itself as material so that we can gain additional effects. Sunlight Wolf is our main monster because it has a lot of the recursion that the deck needs. It can add whenever it's summoned using itself, we can add a spell or trap card from our graveyard to our hand, and that is how we're going to be trying to search out Salamangreat Rage and Salamangreat Roar. Additionally, the most powerful effect of Salamangreat Rage comes in the form of targeting a link monster that was summoned through using itself as material in order to pop cards on the field. It's a non-targeting destruction effect, and so basically we'll be able to do, for the most part, it'll be a 2 pop because we'll be using Sunlight Wolf, which is link 2, so we'll be able to pop 2 cards on the field without targeting through the Salamangreat Rage. So yeah, that's kind of the battle plan. The rest of the deck focuses on setting up these powerful boards and using these different forms of negations and interruptions. And then eventually, once our opponent is kind of whittled down and out of resources, we go for a very powerful Access Code Talker OTK plan. We have a climb, a link climb into Access Code Talker with Update Jammer and Transcode that allows Access Code Talker to be our main finisher. It can attack, it'll basically be able to attack twice, and it will be able to gain 3,000 attack to go to 5,300. So 10,600 damage in total. So yeah, I think it's a really fun deck. I think it's pretty strong. It has a lot of, it's very versatile. I really like the versatility of the deck. There's always, it always feels like I have something that I can do, a play that I can make in order to overcome like any situation that my opponent throws at me. So a really fun deck to try out. I really recommend. It's a little bit more on the complicated side. You have to really understand, you know, different paths of interruption. There was one time where I tried to Solemn Judgment Drytron. I actually didn't save that replay because I messed it up and I forgot to save it, but I messed up the Drytron matchup and I tried to Solemn Judgment something that I couldn't. But like there's a lot of, you know, kind of small intricacies to the deck, and it does take a little bit more to pilot. Unfortunately, the deck is a little expensive. As you can kind of see, there's a lot of SRs and URs. We are running a more budget-friendly build with Forbidden Chalice and some of the more, some more copies of things like Jack Jaguar. So this is kind of going to be a slightly more budget-friendly build. I'll talk about what we can do to improve it. The nice thing about Salamangreat is the engine itself, the actual like core of the archetype is very, very small and very easy to search out. Therefore, in a more optimized world, there's going to be a lot more hand traps in this particular build. So let's go ahead and talk about the card by card. So for this deck in particular, I'm running 2 copies of Max C, 3 copies of Ash Blossom. These are just your standard hand traps. Ash Blossom is everywhere. Basically negates searches. Max C is also a pretty standard card to run. Lets me draw if my opponent starts trying to combo off. I only have 2 copies of it, mostly being a free-to-play player, but also just not really feeling like I want to use my points for another copy of this. Probably could, but I do want to try to pick up other hand traps now. We have 3 copies of the Flame Buffalo. This is a really powerful card. Basically, this allows us to do 2 things. We can not only we can draw 2 cards, but also we can chain block our search with Balinks. So Balinks, real quick, is a really powerful link card. This is going to be our combo starter. Essentially what Balinks can do is it'll allow us to add our field spell from our deck to our hand. And additionally, while it's in the graveyard, it will protect our monster, or it'll actually protect any Salamangreat card from destruction. You can banish this instead. Very, very powerful effect. Allows us to avoid things like Raigeki, avoid things like Lightning Storm. This is actually something that protects our field spell too. And it will even protect our Will of the Salamangreat if it's on the field. So these are, this is a really powerful protection effect in our graveyard. Yeah, anyway, Flame Buffalo will allow us to chain block so that we can guarantee that our search goes off, assuming they don't have something like Infinite Impermanence or whatever. But if they're trying to ash this, the Flame Buffalo will chain block it, and they'll be forced to ash the Buffalo, which does kind of suck, but it's not nearly as it's much better to get the search from the Balinks. But yeah, draw 2 is also really good. Foxy is one of our other main cards. This is basically going to be a pretty nice excavate effect where we can summon this card, where we can normal summon this card, excavate the top 3 cards of our deck, and add any Salamangreat we see out of that excavation. This is actually sometimes a pretty nice bait for Ash Blossom, as some people will actually use it here to try and prevent us from searching into other things, and that will be a really nice thing because usually we don't care that this resolves, or we usually don't care that this gets interrupted. The other effect is a really powerful summon effect from the graveyard. We just discard a Salamangreat card, special summon it, and then we can actually destroy 1 face-up spell or trap card on the field. This includes our own if we, for whatever reason, need to do that. But of course, this will be a great way to destroy cards on our opponent's field. And this actually resolves in the graveyard. This is really powerful. This card And this effect here to destroy resolves in the graveyard. Therefore, we can actually pop things like Skill Trade. Even though Foxy will summon itself to the field, the actual destruction effect will go through due to being a graveyard resolution. So this is a really powerful tool for us to out a lot of the, the popular floodgates. So really useful card here. One copy of Gazelle. We can't run more. We would run 3 if we could, but this is probably the most useful card in the entire deck. This allows us to Foolish Burial one of our Salamangreat cards. Any single card in the Salamangreat archetype we can send to the graveyard when this card gets summoned. And this card can special summon itself whenever any Salamangreat card goes to the graveyard for any reason. So this is really useful. A lot of times we can combo this with Spinny because it can send itself to boost up a monster on the field. So if we have both of these cards in our hand, we basically have our, our combo, full combo here. Spinny will allow us to also... Spinny also has the ability to special summon itself from the graveyard if we control a Salamangreat monster. This is just a free summon. There's no downside here. Of course, it does banish itself when it leaves the field, but we can actually bypass that if we go into Mirage Stalio. One copy of Lady Debug. If you're running a more hand trap focused variant, I would recommend probably 3 of these. Check out Pax build if you so desire. He has a much more expensive build. Obviously, he's running like 1 billion UR hand traps. That's one of the best things that this deck can do, is it can run a lot of those hand traps to just really mess with your opponent on their first turn. And because of that, Flame Buffalo is not as useful because Flame Buffalo does require a Cybers monster to discard, and since that build runs more hand traps, there's not as many Cybers monsters to discard, so it's much better to have the Lady Debug and the multiple hand traps. But if you're running a build like this that's a little more focused on the actual Salamangreat cards, I personally prefer the Buffalo draw. One copy of Falco. This allows us to set one of our Salamangreat spells and traps if this card gets sent to the graveyard. This is a really useful effect that we can use. It can also special summon itself by returning a Salamangreat card on the field to the hand. Another pretty useful effect. Salamangreat monster, my bad, but yeah, really useful effect. We can use that to recycle our Gazelle as well. We're running 3 copies of Jack Jaguar. This is a really useful card for recycling a lot of our resources. For the most part, we'll be using it to recycle extra deck monsters. Basically, if we control a Link monster, we can special summon this to a card, to a zone that the Link monster points to, with the cost of sending one of our Salamangreat monsters from the graveyard back to the deck. So most of the time we'll be shuffling back our extra deck monsters to recycle them and continue our plays. We're running 1 copy of Salamangreat Foul. This is kind of a personal tech choice. I like the fact that it just summons itself for free if you summon a Salamangreat monster, so it's kind of nice. It's not the most useful out of the Salamangreat archetype, but I think it's sometimes it's sometimes it comes in handy, and one of my replays does have this being useful. It also has the ability to stop our opponent's spell or trap card from activating by sending a face-up Salamangreat card, or by sending a Salamangreat card from the hand or face-up on the field to the graveyard. This is it's not the greatest. It can occasionally come into play. There's a lot of Eldritch running around, so maybe that can be useful, but for the most part, we're just here for the free special summon and whatnot. But this is probably the easiest one to cut. If you really need to add some other cards, I would probably cut this one first. 2 copies of Pot of Desires. This is going to be the Pot of Desires build. There's 2 versions of this build. There's the Pot of Desires option, or you can run triple Upstart Goblin, whichever you so desire. Upstart Goblin's probably a little bit better, but I don't have Upstart Goblin and I don't have enough to craft it, so right now I'm just going to stick with the Desires. That's one of the reasons we're running multiple copies of our monsters, because we don't want to banish them. You might ask, why are we running a single copy of Sanctuary then? Well, our goal is to search it before we attempt to Pot of Desires. But now that I've also learned that, we don't need the Sanctuary to activate these additional effects, it's not the worst case scenario if we do banish the Sanctuary. And I actually have a couple of replays where we play around losing the Sanctuary anyway. We also have 3 copies of Sign Up Mining. This is another searcher. This searches any Cybers monster, not just our salads. So I don't know why people call it salad, but I'm going to stick with it, salads. So basically, this will search our Flame Buffalo or our Lady Debug as well. It does not only search it doesn't only search our salads. Additionally, there's a nice play with Gazelle. If we send one of our Salamangreat cards to the graveyard off of this cost, because it says send one, has a cost of sending 1 card to the graveyard, and we search Gazelle, in that same rotation we can summon Gazelle because it still recognizes immediately after that Salamangreat card gets sent to the graveyard, which is kind of weird, but that's kind of something that we can do as well. So just more search, more consistency, really nice. Our field spell, this is how we're going to be using a lot of our additional effects of link summoning. I think it's called reincarnation link summoning. Sounds really fancy. Basically, this will allow us to use 1 card as material in order to link summon additional copies of our link monsters. 2 copies of Will of the Salamangreat. This is both a monster reborn and a soul charge. If we have a link monster that was summoned using itself as material, we can soul charge multiple copies of Salamangreat monsters based on the link rating. So basically, if we have Sunlight Wolf on, we can special summon 2 Salamangreat monsters from our graveyard. I like the Monster Reborn effect. It's the first effect on the card. Basically, during the main phase, we can just special summon a Salamangreat monster. There's really nothing more to it, and it's a continuous spell, so we can constantly do this as long as it's on the field. The soul charge part of the effect requires us to send it to the graveyard, but Salad has so many ways to recycle our spells and traps, so don't feel bad about sending spells and traps to the graveyard. Sunlight Wolf can get them back if we need them. 3 copies of Forbidden Chalice. This is just a generic negation that we can use. It's not the best form of negation, obviously. We're using this because it's a more budget-friendly card. I've actually got a lot of use out of this card. It can be it's a very powerful card. If you're looking for cheap kind of alternatives to some of the more powerful hand traps or some of the more powerful forms of interruption, I think Forbidden Chalice is a fantastic card to add to your lineup. I would highly recommend thinking about putting this card into your deck. It's just a really well-rounded form of negation, and you could do so many good things with this play, and it's only rare, so you can easily craft it. 3 copies of Salamangreat Circle. This is has 2 different effects. One is, well, we basically get to add Salamangreat card from our deck to our hand. This is going to be the main thing that we do with this card. However, there is a second effect that allows our Link monster to be unaffected by monster effects for the rest of the turn. This doesn't come up too much. I was listening to Pack. He mentioned that this is the second effect is a good way to play around Nibiru. I never ran into any Nibirus because some of this video, as you'll notice, is going to be on the lower end of the ladder, so most of this is going to be Eldritch, a couple of other slightly roguish decks. They're kind of meta, but they're not going to be, there's no Drytron, there's no like spamming of hand traps for the most part, but there is some pretty good replays. So I know it's going to be silver, not the greatest, not the highest level competition, but there is going to be, I think it's still a pretty good collection of replays, and I hope that I give you guys enough kind of information through those replays. But yeah, this is a pretty versatile card. Most of the time, like I said, we're going to be using the first effect to continue to search some of our combo pieces, but Pack is the better player, and he says that this is a great second effect to play around Nibiru. So if you are running into that card, then we have ways to deal with that as well, which I think is really cool. Like, we have ways to interact and deal with almost any situation. There's so much versatility in this deck, like I mentioned, and I really enjoy that. 2 copies of Rage, 2 copies of Roar. These are going to be our primary Salamangreat traps to interrupt our opponent. We're running 2 copies so that we can potentially banish one with Pot of Desires. This just gives us a better chance of not banishing our entire, the entirety of these cards. Then we have 2 copies of Salamangreat. Next, we have 2 copies of Rage, 2 copies of Roar. These are just going to be our primary, Salamangreat traps to try to prevent our opponent, interrupt our opponent during their turn and interact with them. These are going to be our main forms of interaction, and we're running 2 copies of them so that we can potentially play. So because we're playing Pot of Desires, we don't want to banish ours. If we run in single copies, we wouldn't want to banish them. Additionally, for Salamangreat Roar, if we link summon a monster, it will be summoned from our. We can reset this from our graveyard to our side of the field. So that's a pretty nice effect to have, and I just like having 2 copies of them. I know it's maybe not the optimal list, but it just feels nicer to, if something happens to one, I'll still have another one to potentially rely on. We have 1 copy of Versatility. This is a really powerful rank 3 monster for our deck. This allows us to special summon any Salamangreat monster from our deck in defense position. However, if you do decide to make that play, it does lock you into fire effect monsters only. This is really important to keep in mind, because if you're trying to go for crazy extended combos, it does lock you out of your access code and your full access code talker OTK battle plan. So just keep that in mind. You don't want to use this effect until you're at the end of your access code plays, or you just can't do it for whatever reason and you need to set up another board. It also has the ability to bounce a monster back to the hand if it gets sent to the field or sent to the graveyard for a link summon. So that's pretty useful. Pretty nice way to bypass protection or certain protections that cards might have. We have 1 copy of Baguska. This is a rank 4 monster that is pretty nice. Occasionally it's not the best play, but this can sometimes set up a nice little monster for our opponent to try and deal with. Basically, while this card is in defense position, it will put all of our opponent's monsters in defense position and then negate the activated effects of those monsters. So this can be a really nice kind of potential, interruption, just continual interruption effect that our opponent has to deal with and figure out how to, deal with this card before they can actually start making their plays. So this is a pretty nice. This can be a pretty nice card to have. We also have a lot of level 4 monsters to actually go into this, so not too hard to actually rank 4 into Baguska, and it's pretty nice. 1 copy of Zeus. This is probably not necessary. You don't need Zeus if you don't want to, but we do have Mirage Stalio that can attack, so you could potentially, climb up into, rank up into Zeus. I just have it in here. I don't think I've ever used it, honestly, so probably not something that you would need. If you have 2nd copy of access code, this might be a better option instead of Zeus. 3 Bailings, we talked about this. You want to run 3 copies of this so that you can have more searches and have more protection in the graveyard. Update Jammer is going to be our combo into access code. We'll bring that up in a second. 3 copies of Sunlight Wolf. This is the bread and butter of the deck. We're going to be summoning this card quite a lot, and this is a card that we want to make sure we run 3 copies of. Unfortunately, it's a UR, but just kind of have to deal with it. 1 copy of Splash Mage. This is just kind of there. I don't think I've summoned it too often. 1 copy of Transcode for our access code play. 2 copies of Heatleo. This is a really powerful Link 3. I really like this card. It's not fully necessary against decks that don't use a lot of spells and traps, but I have found that in this best of 1 format that there's a lot of random rogue strategies, and then of course Eldritch is just a really powerful budget friendly archetype that is constantly running around with 5 spells and traps, and this is a really great way to deal with the Eldritch archetype because it targets the spells and traps and puts them back to the deck. This happens on summon, so once this card is link summoned, target 1 spell or trap card, put it into the deck. And that is really nice to bypass a lot of the graveyard effects that the Eldritch cards have. So if you're familiar with Eldritch, basically while they're in the graveyard, they can banish themselves to set another copy of another Eldritch card, and they just constantly recycle. This will bypass that. Just put them back into the deck. No recycling for you. We run 2 copies of them so that we can potentially use our field spell to, bounce 2 cards. So that's a really nice effect to kind of have on hand. And it also, it gets rid of cards that we don't want. So this is a really nice card to have. There's also other random archetypes running around with back row that might, want to use this. We also have the Rage to deal with back row, like I mentioned, this is untargeting destruction, so I do think that with Rage and with this, back row is not as problematic as with maybe some other decks. So I really like this versatility here. We can pop some monsters, or we can pop some back row, and then if we really need to deal with a lot of back row, we have Yugioh. And it's Link 3, and it's 2300. Not the best, but, you know, we can use it. And then we have Access Code Talker. This is going to be our finisher for the deck. Basically, what we're going to be doing is using Update Jammer. Whenever Update Jammer is sent to the graveyard for the summon of a Link monster, that Link monster that it summons will be allowed to attack twice in the battle phase. So basically, the main battle plan here is to go into Update Jammer. After we go into Update Jammer, we'll go into Transcode Talker. Transcode Talker will then resummon the Update Jammer using its effect to special summon Link 3 or lower, and then we'll use Transcode and Update Jammer to summon our Access Code Talker. Access Code will target the Transcode. Basically, it gains attack based on the Link rating of one of the monsters that was used to summon it, so we'll gain 3000 attack from this being Link 3. And then we'll also be using Update Jammer's effect to give it 2 attacks in the battle phase. That is a really powerful, finishing combo. We'll have a 5300 Access Code Talker that can attack twice. This is going to be our primary way of finishing off games. And if our opponent still has cards on the field, we can start using Access Code's effect to start popping cards on the field. So this is a really useful way for us to finish out and close out games. This is going to be our primary method of ending the duel real fast. 2 attacks with Access Code Talker, 5300 each, for a total of 10,600 damage. Pretty insane. So yeah, that's kind of the Salamangreat archetype. I think it's a lot of fun. It's been such a blast to play and try and figure out how to build around certain, strategies and play around certain strategies. I personally really like this deck. I think it can be improved. Obviously, we can get rid of Chalice for something stronger, maybe Infinite Impermanence, or we can potentially get rid of 1 copy of Foul for something else, maybe drop this down to 2 Jack Jaguar and put in something like, Effect Veiler, maybe Nibiru, things like that. I think it's, obviously those are things that you can do. You can, if you have more hand traps than I do, go ahead, craft them, put them in here in place of some of these more free-to-play friendly options that I do have. And then obviously Solemn Judgment, it's a good card, but this is a card, free-to-play friendly card that I also have, so I would obviously want to remove this in favor of maybe more hand traps or something. So that's going to go ahead and wrap up the deck list breakdown. I'm going to go ahead and throw you guys over to replay version of me, and I hope you guys enjoy the replays. Alrighty, I am back here with the replay version of myself to showcase you 5 replays for today's video, one of which will be against Eldritch. That's kind of the more premier matchup that I wanted to showcase, just to show you just how many options the deck has and how it can out some of the powerful floodgates that they like to run. Another one against Sky Strikers. That one's going to showcase you the power that Baguska can have and showcase just how somewhat problematic that card can be for your opponent. Another match is going to be against a Synchro deck. That one's not going to be quite as kind of insightful, but it's going to showcase just the sheer amount of power and card advantage that the Salamangreat deck can pull off while facing up against an opponent. My opponent's not going to have the most powerful strategy, obviously, and they're not going to have the most optimal deck, but it'll showcase you just how much power is behind Salads in the Salamangreat archetype. Another one will be against Cyber Dragons. That one's just going to kind of highlight some of the recursion, because I do some of the recursion that the deck can have in recycling cards. And then finally one against Phantom Knights, and basically that one's just going to show you how broken Maxi is, because it basically turns my opponent, basically ends my opponent's turn. But it'll also be a moment for me to highlight how I would more optimally play that deck or play that turn. So let's go ahead and jump straight into the Eldritch deck. So here's the deck list of my opponent. They are playing You know, pretty standard Eldritch type stuff. You know, multiple copies of traps, a billion traps. You know, they're going to be even playing all of the skill drains and all of the other floodgates that they can have access to, just to try and, you know, just basically kind of annoy your opponent to death and basically shut off all of their plays. So this one is going to be pretty solid. My opponent admittedly isn't the greatest. As you can see here, it is a bronze player. This is my rank up match into bronze, and my opponent is, you know, kind of riding on the strength of Eldritch here. And you can kind of see this in some of the early plays. So he starts off with the Pot of Prosperity, and he goes for Banish 6, I believe. Oh no, he goes for Banish 3. And I could have swore he went for Banish 6. Whoopsie. I wanted to stop him from going for a bunch of excavations, but so I just go ahead and ash the Pot of Prosperity. Probably could have let that go through since it only was the 3. And then he does top deck the Cursed Eldland, in which he uses to search his Golden Boy, Eldritch Golden Lord himself. He uses the most baffling effect of Eldritch I've ever seen. He decides to activate the Eldritch effect, pitching off a compulsory evacuation device. I personally think he should have held on to this. Just put, you know, just pop the, you know, put the compulse in the face down, and don't use the Golden Lord effect. This might have been a misplay on my opponent's part, where they thought maybe they were trying to do his summon effect, but either way, this was a big misplay, in my opinion, on my opponent, because compulsory would have actually kind of ruined us for a bit there. But anyway, they discard the compulsory, send their face-up card to the field, from the field to the graveyard, and they use that to set one of the Conquistadors. This will allow my opponent to actually get one of the other spells and traps. That's kind of the big thing with the golden, with the Eldritch package, is they can constantly recycle their traps from their graveyard to their deck by banishing themselves. And then he does actually summon the Golden Boy back by using the set Pot of Extravagance that they had, which is kind of all right there. That's not a terrible play, I don't feel. And then they decide to use the Conquistador to set a regular spell, which obviously isn't going to be any use to him, or use to them. So I honestly don't know. I guess maybe they were just expecting to have an insta-win with the skill drain, because that's kind of what this other card turns out to be. I summoned the Salamangreat Fowl off of the effect to summon it alongside my Jaguar, so it can special summon itself if I summon another monster. If I summon another Salamangreat monster. And I go ahead and use the Salamangreat's effect to try and force out his face down card, because I know that if, you know, he lets it go through, if my opponent lets it go through, then they can't activate it. So I know that the card on the right is not something I need to worry about, so we're going to immediately go for targeting the left one. It does turn out to be the skill drain, and we do have to try and figure out a way around this. My opponent, it turns out that I didn't really have anything to really set up here, so I go immediately for the Pot of Desires, and I do manage to top deck into exactly what I needed to out my opponent's skill train. Heart of the cards, baby. We're playing Yu-Gi-Oh after all. Salamangreat Foxy is going to be exactly that, and we are going to activate Salamangreat Fowl's effect once more. So this is something that we can do. It was negated, so we can actually activate the effect. And the discard property of Foul is a cost, so no matter what happens, I get to discard a card. And so we're going to discard Foxy. We don't care that we get negated. We're going to go ahead and add our Gazelle, and we're going to use Gazelle to deal with all of this stuff, or we're going to use Gazelle to send off of the Foxy. We do have to send a Salamangreat card from our hand. We have to discard to activate this. And again, I mentioned this in the breakdown, all of this is resolving in the graveyard. None of this is resolving on the field. So the pop of the spell and trap does get, does happen and we don't have that effect negated. And then from here, we just go into access code talker and OTK is basically what happens. So we use 2 level 4, level 2 or higher monsters, Cyrus monsters, to go into Update Jammer. And then Update Jammer is going to get us into Transcode. Transcode will special summon the access code. And then here I just make a quick misplay towards the end because I'm not familiar with the Golden Lord here. And it turns out that the effect of the Golden Lord here to get 1000 attack and be indestructible, that's just there. Once it goes off, it's a permanent effect. So even though I go for the Forbidden Chalice, trying to turn it off so I can destroy it with access code, but turns out that doesn't actually, do anything. The Golden Lord's still there. But thankfully, even though I make that misplay, it can still be destroyed by battle, and we just OTK with the double access code attack. So pretty standard setup there. I just wanted to kind of highlight I was really satisfied with this duel, to be honest. I love being able to one of my favorite things in Yu-Gi-Oh! Is outplaying opponents when they think that they might have the victory in their hands, and so that was something that I was really satisfied with. A very satisfying victory for myself, and hopefully that highlighted just how powerful the versatility of the deck can be. So for the next match, we're going to be playing against Sky Strikers. This is going to showcase just how powerful Bagooska is. Here is a little hint as to what the archetype is, or what the deck list looks like. Pretty standard list, not going to lie. They have their, triple copies of hand traps. They have their Ray, their Rose, and they pretty much have all of the staples that they would need, and a pretty standard looking extra deck to get into the access code. So pretty standard looking build here, but we're obviously going to manage to outplay my opponent. We're still in silver, so my opponent is a little bit not quite as adept at maybe playing the deck out. So that's something that we will have to obviously recognize. My opponent could have potentially played it better, and I'll make sure to point out that they could have as well. So here we start off with the Salamangreat Fowl and the Salamangreat Foxy or Jack Jaguar once again, and we also have a Falco in our hand. So our hand is not looking the greatest. So I decide to go into the Balinks here, and I decide to use the Balinks in order to search out the field spell, and then go for the field spell and summon a second copy of Balinks, and then that will allow me to grab the Salamangreat Jack Jaguar using the Balinks that's in the graveyard, special summon it back to the field, and then we go into the Bagooska play like I mentioned at the very start. So the Bagooska play here is something that we could have done without going into Balinks. I'm honestly, I'm still a little new to the deck, so I'm not sure if it would have been better, but I think having the Balinks out and being able to set all that stuff up is might be a little bit better. That way we can ensure that we don't top deck our one copy of Sanctuary. That would have been pretty horrible. So I'm not too dissatisfied with this approach. We could have easily just gone straight into Bagooska without making additional plays, but we'll see how it goes. Anyway, our opponent goes into Sky Striker stuff. They go for the Rhoda, and in response to the Rhoda, I believe I go into, or not into the Rhoda, but when my opponent goes for the Ace, I do attempt to max C, because I expect my opponent to do a couple of link plays. But my opponent makes the very unfortunate mistake to tribute the Ray. And I'm not quite sure why you would do this. Unless you were doing a play with the field spell, there's really no reason to tribute Ray for the effect. And so my opponent goes for the tribute effect in order to summon a Sky Striker monster, but of course Bagooska actually stops that because it's an attempt to activate even though it goes into the graveyard. This is just a continual effect for all monsters that activate while in defense position. So that does manage to basically throw a wrench in my opponent's strategy. They don't get their summon. I don't know, again, I'm not quite sure why they didn't just go for a regular Link summon. You can totally do that, but who knows, maybe they had some kind of big brain play in mind, or maybe they're just a little new to the deck. Either way, they make that mistake, and that does kind of cost them the game. So my opponent also made another mistake here with destroying the Balinks. I actually don't think that my opponent should have done that. You'll find here quickly that my opponent actually has a Twin Twister set, and so I actually think if they didn't destroy my Balinks, they could have killed the field spell, which would have been pretty beneficial towards my opponent. I don't think it would have saved them necessarily, but it definitely would have been been an option, would have given them a better outlook on this match. As it stands, my opponent ended up destroying the Balinks, which I do use to protect the Sanctuary, and I do actually change Chalice so that I can actually use the Baguska, or negate the Baguska, because I do want to resolve Flame Buffalo. I do not actually want Buffalo to get negated. I want to be able to draw some cards, so I do go ahead and negate the Baguska with my Chalice, and it's kind of a nice little chain because Chalice is going to get destroyed anyway, and so that is something to keep in mind. I guess I didn't mention that Baguska does work on all monsters, not just your opponents, so it is important to keep in mind. And they do discard the Pankratops, which I think is a pretty good card if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, you can just special summon this from your hand, so just a couple of misplays there, and then my opponent ultimately decides to scoop after I protect my monster, or after I protect my Sanctuary. So I don't know what their face downs were, but apparently it wasn't enough to deter them from the scoop. Next, we're going to showcase a match against a Synchro deck. This is going to be a pretty standard match. Nothing super special here to keep in mind. Our opponent does actually end up bricking, and their deck is not quite as meta relevant as some of the other decks we have faced so far, but this is just going to be a really quick highlight replay to show you just how crazy this deck can go if it really gets its opportunity to pop off. So we start with the Signet Mining. We get to go into the we get to pitch the Spinny. Spinny goes since Spinny goes to the graveyard, even though we're still resolving mining, Gazelle doesn't care. It's a really weird effect, but hey, we take those. Gazelle will of course summon off of that, even though it literally just got added to our hand. So again, it's kind of weird, but oh well, we'll take it. If that's the ruling that Konami wants, then that's the ruling that we'll accept. So anyway, we continue on, and we go for the Mirage Stalio. Mirage Stalio will summon a Jack Jaguar to our side of the field. We'll then go into the Balinks, which will search our field spell and go into pretty much all the standard combos that you're used to. We'll link off the Mirage Stalio and the Balinks into the Sunlight Wolf, and then we can go from there into the second Sunlight Wolf so that we can start recycling some of our cards. So anyway, our opponent doesn't have anything to interrupt ourself, so basically we just continue ourselves into these plays, and we go ahead and use the Jack Jaguar to come back to the field. This will bring back our Gazelle from our graveyard, and then we also use the Sunlight Wolf's effect to bring back our Salamangreat Rage. And basically, set 3 pass. Now we have so many ways to just completely shut down our opponent. We have the Solemn Judgment to negate, to do an Omni Negate, or, well, it's not really an Omni Negate, it's a Summon Negate plus Spell or Trap Negate. And we have the Forbidden Chalice as well. We go for the end phase destruction of his cards, of our opponent's cards. We go into the Salamangreat Rage, and we target his 2 face downs because we don't, I already know what this is, and I know it's not important, so we just go into destroying the face down cards, which does turn out to be a Mirror Force, but wasn't going to really matter because we are going to go straight into Access Code Talker to finish off our opponent. I do make a couple of plays here to kind of get ourselves set up, but you can just really see just how much advantage our deck can generate. We go from having like already a ton of cards all the way into you know, using the Flame Buffalo and just drawing even more cards. Here I want to highlight real quick, I actually did a chain sequence. I used the Sunlight Wolf's effect, which allows me to add a fire monster from our graveyard to our hand, and I chained that one second. So I used the Flame Buffalo as a chain link 1, and then I used the Sunlight Wolf as a chain link 2. The Sunlight Wolf is going to resolve first, which will add the Spinny back to our hand. Because if you recall, we had the Spinny in our graveyard, and so I wanted to add it back into our hand. And because I did that, I can now immediately discard the Spinny in order to use the Flame Buffalo. So I sequenced it in that particular order specifically so that I could make sure that I'm getting advantage in this process and not actually going down in card advantage in any means whatsoever, because now I still have the Spinny in my graveyard ready to be a free summon. So we're just riding high here. We go ahead and use the Gazelle to send the Roar, or yeah, the Salamangreat Roar, the Roar to the graveyard, the counter trap that we'll be using, and we go ahead and finish off into the access code play. This is just going to be a pretty standard access code OTK. Our opponent doesn't actually have any response to this particular line, but even if they did, like, just look at how many things we have. Once access code is ready to go, we still have another Sunlight Wolf, we still have the Rage in our hand, we still have the Salamangreat Roar in our graveyard. We were going to be riding high, almost nothing our opponent could do, not to mention 2 Ash Blossoms in our hand, so we're just completely destroying our opponent here. But yeah, I didn't want that. That's not really anything special in particular when it comes to like outplaying my opponent. I just wanted to really give you guys a kind of a glimpse into like just the ceiling that the deck can have with all of the advantage and all of the, you know, recursion that it can offer. All right, so one of the final 2 decks is going to be against this player here, who is currently playing Cyber Dragons. Cyber Dragons, I feel, are, you know, they're pretty top rogue contender. They're not the worst archetype, but they're lacking just a little bit, but they do have a lot of tools to their advantage, so they're not the, you know, they're still a very big, a very strong deck to play against. So our opponent does have to go second, which is part of the, kind of part of the issue with going against Salads, is we do have a lot of ways to set up a powerful board. Our opponent also does end up getting their Max C Ash Blossomed, so that is kind of unfortunate for them. Very fortunate for us, however. The Salamangreat archetype loves to special summon, so it can be very frustrating, and not frustrating, but like it can be a little problematic when we get Max Seed. It does give our opponents a lot of cards sometimes in order to set up the things that we need, but thankfully we have the Ash Blossom in hand to prevent our opponent's Max Seed from going off. So we go into the Balinks, and the Balinks is going to trigger, and that's when my opponent goes for the Max C. I decide to immediately Ash the Max C and go from there. I think with this particular hand, I would have been okay without having Ash the Max C. Like, I think I could have managed to figure out a way to deal with what my opponent has, even with Max C being on the table. And I even, because we do have the Roar as an Omni Negate, and we would have a Max C of our own to kind of cycle through some of our decks. So I don't think it would have been the end of the world, but it is definitely nice. You don't want to be Max-Seed against, especially in a Link deck that likes to cycle through a lot of cards. Summon the Gazelle. The Gazelle does mill off a card that we really, or it does end up milling out a card for us. We go ahead and mill one of the Jack Jaguars, I believe, in order to set up another combo. This is something that is really cool about the Sunlight Wolf card itself, and that is, it can recycle any fire monster, not just your Salamangreats. So I do the Sunlight Wolf to get my circle back, just to kind of have a follow-up. And then I go ahead and use the Jaguar, sending back the one of the cards in order to summon it to the zone. And then that will bring back the Ash Blossom that I literally just used. So we have so many ways to interrupt our opponent now. We have the Ash Blossom and we do have the Salamangreat Roar. The fact that this card can recycle Ash Blossoms is honestly pretty nutty. It's a really nice thing to have in this particular for this strategy. We can just constantly have this available to stop our opponent, and it's just a really solid really solid thing that you can do. Immediately use Ash Blossom to stomp the Maxi, and then we just get it right back. Opens up the Cyber Dragon core. This is the core of the deck. And of course we're going to immediately Ash Blossom the core because, well, it's the core of the deck and it searches almost anything that you would need to kind of follow up. And so I'm going to bank on the fact that they don't have a follow-up and hope that it's only the Cyber Dragon core that they need to that they have in their hand. My opponent goes for the Called by the Grave to try and, you know, resolve their Cyber Dragon, but we just go ahead and negate the Called by the Grave, and that does, the resolution of this does end up making our opponent surrender. So clearly they didn't actually have any follow-up as I was hoping for. There are some other cards that they potentially could have used, Cyber Emergency or something like that, to try and get more material, and maybe if they had like the you know, if they had the level 5 monster with the, what is it called? I don't remember what it's called. This one, if they had the Galaxy Soldier, they could have, maybe they had enough ways to bring or send this to the field and go into infinity in some capacity. So there was a potential threat of that, but that's a very specific hand state, so I immediately wanted to make sure the Cyber Dragon core just gets shut down. And finally, we're going to be playing against a Phantom Knight deck. This deck is looking fairly, fairly meta. I don't know enough about the Phantom Knight archetype to really know what it is that they're looking to do in terms of like a meta Phantom Knight deck versus a non-meta. It does appear that they have only one copy of Ash Blossom, so it doesn't seem like they've bothered to go, craft the rest. So, still not the highest tier deck, not the highest potential that the deck could be, but it's still a meta strategy with a lot of, powerful tools at their disposal. So we do go ahead and we can go ahead and load up into this one. This deck we do have to go second, but this is going to really showcase just how powerful Maxi is against these combo decks. Phantom Knights special summon all the time. So as soon as they go in and search for their Phantom Knights, which they use reinforcement of the army, I immediately play the Maxi, and my opponent immediately ends their turn. So Maxi just immediately kills all of the momentum that my opponent was looking to build. They didn't want to give me a huge hand because that's kind of how Phantom Knights work. So we can go ahead and start into Signet Mining. Signet Mining is going to get us Flame Buffalo. Our opponent doesn't seem to have much interaction for themselves, so we're going to be able to kind of go full combo here. I begin Flame Buffalo into the Salamangreat Balinks, and then I use the Gazelle as well to send a copy of the Salamangreat Rage. In case you missed that, I used Gazelle to send Rage to the graveyard to be our follow-up. I do go ahead and discard the Spinny in order to draw 2, and we go ahead and draw into multiple copies or another copy of the Spinny and an Ash Blossom, which is pretty nice. You notice here that I didn't actually do anything to chain block the Balinks. I didn't feel any kind of responses from our opponent. This is kind of like a Duel Links thing. If you've played Duel Links, you can actually kind of feel out responses from your opponent. And so I didn't really feel any, and therefore I just assumed that they didn't have one. So I went really greedy and decided to go for the Balink search first. That way I wouldn't potentially draw into Sanctuary. So now we have a pretty solid hand here. Our opponent doesn't have anything on the field. I don't know what they're playing, obviously. I know there's Phantom Knights, but I don't know. Maybe they have an Effect Veiler or something. So here is kind of where I wanted to highlight a quick misplay. So I go ahead and bring back the Jack Jaguar, and I used the spinny. So I used the spinny in my pause it. Why is it not pausing? I used the spinny in my graveyard to send out the Jack Jaguar, and before I go into transcode, I did have the update jammer and the Balinks on the field. Spinny does not activate if you do not have a Salamangreat monster on the field, and so in order to make sure that I had something available for my follow-up, I really needed to make sure that I had Spinny on the field before going into access code. So that's a little bit of a misplay on my part, because like I said, if my opponent didn't have anything or had something to interrupt this play into access code, then I would just be sitting on access code, and that's not really great. Access code is not a very durable boss monster. It's a finisher, not kind of a, it's not a board presence really. It's only there to OTK and end games. So, ending on the access code with really nothing else to kind of protect it or to interrupt my opponent, that's just a no good situation. That's not a, that's a no deal right there. Thankfully, it goes out in our favor and our opponent doesn't have a response to interrupt this access code OTK climb. But under the, in a different environment, that would be something that could cost me the game right there. So I just want to highlight that. I want to make sure that, you guys are aware of those types of plays. I needed to make sure Spinny was on the field before going into access code, just so that I could ensure that I have more Salamangreat monsters to work my way into, potentially get the rage back, or maybe go into some other plays or something like that. I don't think it really would have mattered, like kind of looking at the state of the game. I think it would have just been a Spinny on the field and nothing else really, but you got to make sure that you are opening yourself up to these potential backup plays under the circumstance that your initial battle plan doesn't work. But again, it does. So access code OTK, like I said in the discussion for the deck list, this is going to be the primary way that we close out games, and we just managed to double attack for 10,600. It's pretty nasty. Holy crap. So that's kind of all of the replays. I hope I got all of this information, across as, as efficiently and as concisely as possible. I'm still kind of recovering from the cold, so apologies for some of the lackluster commentary and potential issues in speaking and whatnot. So I do apologize for that as well, but I hope you guys were able to kind of learn something from this. I know I'm not the greatest Salamangreat player. I know I'm not the best Yu-Gi-Oh player. I'm still in gold, so I'm not anything special, but I'd like to think that some of my experience from playing Duel Links and explaining cards through Duel Links can kind of translate here, and I can help some people, even if it's just one or two, learn a thing or two with a new deck. So that's going to wrap up the rest of the video. If you want to see more content from my channel, feel free to hit the subscribe button and the bell notification icon. I did mention that I want to continue interacting and creating content for Master Duel, but my channel is a little bit more variety, so I will be working on other projects as well once I kind of get through this cold that I'm dealing with. And of course, if you enjoyed this video and maybe learned a thing or two, hit the like button down below. It really helps out the channel and means quite a lot to me. It really helps the channel grow and build through the algorithm. And if you have any comments on Salamangreats, maybe a combo or something that you might have that I missed in the video, feel free to let me know in the comments down below, or let me know what one of your favorite archetypes is, or if one of your favorite archetypes are. If you want to see more, if there's any other decks that you would want to see from my channel, let me know. I'll try my best to get as many decks as I can. I can't promise every single deck. Again, there's a billion cards in Yu-Gi-Oh, and I can only get through so many decks at a time, but I will be working on some other decks as well. I want to build Sky Strikers. I really like the waifus, so I want to try to build them and see if I can get them to work. But for now, Salamangreats is a lot of fun. Anyway, enough rambling and whatnot. Thank you guys so much for tuning in and joining me for this video. I hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Later.